Sorry, guys. Okay, I think that cleared up. So let me just start by thanking Jeremy and Charlotte for putting these together. The presentations have been super exciting and super interesting, and my hope is that what we're going to present today fits the same line and the theme of the conference. And just to give you an idea of what we're doing, Daniel and I have been working for the past couple of years on this idea of decolonial metal in Latin America, looking at how metal musicians throughout the region and metal fans throughout the region are actually using metal music and creating metal music and consuming it as a way of decolonial reflections, a way of understanding the linkages between the modern project and the project of coloniality in Latin America in particular. Our hope is that through an examination of how decolonial metal actually takes shape and what it's actually doing in Latin America, windows open up to an understanding of how images of the pre-modern and discussions of the pre-modern come into effect into that critical process. So hopefully that shines through the presentation. And Daniel and I will be chatting with each other throughout the presentation as a way to challenge sole authorship of things and co-constructed knowledges, okay? So I'd like to start by just briefly defining some of the terms that we're going to be using through the presentation. And these are terms that come from Daniel and I most recent publications, particularly the Metal in Latin America book and the Decolonial Metal in Latin America book. We are proposing that metal music in the region is engaging in a decolonial agenda, and it's doing so through what we call extreme decolonial dialogues. And in a nutshell, these are conversations through music that allow us to understand how the colonial process is still very much present in our societies. We label them extreme because they're using metal music and they're using extreme sounds that for many in the regions sound completely alien, completely out of place. We also call them extreme because they're tackling subject matters that many people in Latin America would rather not talk about and would rather not link to the colonial experience. So we're thinking about colonial violence, murder, extermination, extractivism, repression, political repression, coup d'etat, for examples. We label them decolonial because these conversations allow us to understand not only 15th century colonialism, but the long-term effects of that colonial experience, what Aníbal Quijano in Peru called coloniality. So we're thinking about these conversations that metal musicians are having, linking the past to the present, understanding how to devalue categorizations of people, culture, and place that took place through the colonial process in the 15th century are very much present and alive today. And that's what Quijano called coloniality, and the decolonial process aims to examine that and kind of find ways to deconstruct it and construct something different, right? And we call them dialogues because we think of these as learning experiences between metalheads, between musicians and fans and people who consume metal. And we don't think of them as top-down approaches. We think of them as conversations between equals. And in that sense, we kind of echo Paulo Freire's work on the democratization of the learning process in the classroom. We think of metal as a learning experience, in this case, as a learning experience of decolonial undertones, right? In the past, and maybe you've seen this in some of our work and some of our presentations and publications, we focused on the sonic and the lyrical aspects of decolonial metal. The way that metal sounds different in Latin America as a decolonial strategy, the way they integrate local instrumentations as a decolonial reflection, and the way that what they sing about, the lyrical content of those songs, as a way to challenge that process of coloniality too. Now we're working on a book that should come out in 2023 on the visual dimensions of metal music in Latin America and the Caribbean, understanding that metal as a visual medium also uses imagery as a way to challenge the history of coloniality in the region. And we base this on the idea that, particularly Mirzoeff's work on countervisuality, how metal music tells people there is something to see here, right? It goes against the telling of history from the perspective of the hero. It's a countervisuality. It's a way of pushing back and saying there's something that needs to be seen here. And that particular something has to do with our colonial experience. So this time around, and particularly in this presentation, we're going to focus on the visual dimensions of that decolonial approach that Latin American music is taking. And what we're arguing today, and we're going to show you examples of each one of these three dimensions, is that through that countervisuality, through that telling of that story, through the visual, through saying, stop here, there's something to be looked at, right? Don't just walk by, right? There's something to be examined here. Metal music in its decolonial undertone is doing three things. It's establishing a visual record of the colonial experience in the region. It's actually transforming the way that we think about how that process of coloniality is recorded, particularly subverting linked themes that continue to serve as oppressive linkages in the region. Take, for example, the equation of the indigenous with docility, the equation of the environment with extractivism, the equation of the local as worthless. So the visual dimensions of the colonial metal is challenging those linkages, right? And we're going to show you examples of how that works. And finally, we are going to look at how metal music revisits pre-modern imagery as a strategy to guide the future. And it does so in an anti-nostalgic mode. One of the things we want to challenge with what we're going to be presenting today, and we think this is a reflection that needs to be carried out throughout the conference, is that when metal in Latin America examines the pre-modern, it doesn't do it from a perspective of nostalgia. It's not visiting the past for the sake of visiting the past. It's not reflecting about the past to make itself different from metal music in the global north. It's actually revisiting the past in an anti-nostalgic mode to find ways to move forward after the colonial experience, to challenge coloniality on an everyday basis, right? And that to us is very, very important. Why we look at the past in some of these Latin American metal bands. So having said that, I'm thinking about decolonial metal and these extreme decolonial dialogues and the idea that these dialogues also have a visual component to them. What we want to do now is go through these three examples of what decolonial metal through its visual component does and how that helps us revisit the past as a way to move forward into the future. And Danielle, I think this is the section that you're taking over.
And as Nelson prefaced, this is intended to be an extreme decolonial dialogue. And I want to emphasize the nature of that. This is the type of work that Nelson and I usually do. We engage in a dialogue, usually with topics that are very uncomfortable, and we navigate our way through it. It's kind of, muddy waters and trying to find details here and there and some sort of logic, right? So with that spirit in mind, rather than call this even a presentation, this is a dialogue. So to that first point of Mirzoeff in his conception of visuality and countervisuality, we have the visual record of coloniality. So we want to show this image from La Armada. And by the way, Nelson doesn't know this, but I actually got my vinyl today. There we go.
There you go.
So it kind of coincided. So I want us to look at this image and do, very openly look at it. Obviously, the album itself is called Anticolonial Volume 2, which means there was a Volume 1, right? This is a constant topic by this band from the Dominican Republic originally. They now reside in Chicago. And in working from the belly of the beast, as I like to say, they're constantly reflecting on their positionality as immigrants in the US and, critiquing, exposing some of the problems that they have experienced or that their community in Chicago has experienced, or people in general. So everything with them is very methodical. It's very selected. It's very, very to the point, right? And it's with the intention of making some sort of reflection. So with that, and I'm not going to open it too much, but I want to see if anyone in the audience, one or two people, would like to comment very quickly on the image and what you feel you see in said image. And again, very short, because obviously we're limited in time, but we want to engage in a dialogue. So one or two people can unmute and say something about the image.
Maybe we should just have Charlotte say what she sees here.
All right.
Sure. That way we can move it forward.
Yay.
Perfect.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think that's quite an arresting image. Like, I feel like I'm being stared at very angrily by one person. So I feel very connected to that because of the eye contact in it. It seems whoever it is, yeah, I feel like I'm looking at something old. So it looks to me like this is a statue of some sort or a piece of art that someone has created to evoke that kind of confrontation. So it feels like quite confrontational to me. I'm intrigued about what that says about me and how I think. But yeah, that's my kind of instant kind of gut reaction.
So yeah, that's fine. And again, visuality, and I come from a background also of documentary, studying documentary and cinematography. Your angle, your mise-en-scène, your choice of shot determines a lot of the way that we read into things. So if Nelson wants to jump to the next slide, this is actually a photo taken of this sculpture of the cacique Caunabo, who was a cacique in La Española, when at the time that Colón came to the Caribbean. And this cacique was pretty much the leader of the resistance on the part of the indigenous folks on the island when the Spaniards came. What we find fascinating about La Armada and what they're doing with their countervisuality, right, as Mirzoeff said, it establishes a visual record of the manifestations of 15th century colonialism and its ongoing legacy as a critique of European modernity. So it's fascinating that they've chosen to show you the face, right? Crop the image and just show you that stern face looking back at the colonizers, or looking back at the people that have shackled this individual. Because as you can see, this person has been, taken in, wrested away from his freedom. So again, in a band like Armada, and we see this across the region, you take a visual record and you read it, and then you project it back to the empire, or you project it back to even the archive and the way that things are read, right? So it's a rereading. It's a way of, as we say Mirzoeff says, who has the right to look? And usually the empire and the people in power determine or basically take up the right to look. And what we're saying is the contrast or the countervisuality of what we're seeing is they're modifying that right to look into I have the right to look back. So that quotation, what that Nelson had at the beginning and that slide of, the police is looking and, move along, there's nothing to see here. These bands, these artists, and people in the region, particularly within the metal community, have taken icons like Caunabo, reappropriated them, and projected them back to us. So with that in mind, we have a little clip of one of the songs of that new album. It's called White Jesus. We'll just show a very clip. Here we go.
Sorry, Daniel.
Yeah, no, go ahead. We're good. Right. So very quickly, that quote at the beginning was, what's her name? Laura Ingraham, I think, in Fox. Very openly and in a very racist tone said, there's demographic changes that we didn't vote for or we didn't choose. And obviously, again, to go back to, reappropriating figures and constructs of pre-modernity, there you have just the title itself and the song itself, this concept of white Jesus, as the empire has basically appropriated the figure of Christ as some sort of emblem of whiteness and justifying everything that they're doing. So again, it's a way of reflecting back to the empire, the figures that they have constructed for us to believe, and then projecting it back through a countervisual reading. So with that in mind, we're going to go to the second point, and Nelson's going to start with this one.
One thing that I think is important to mention about the Armadas example that Daniel discussed is that it's a clear example of linking 15th century colonialism to modern day coloniality. It's the same band thinking about how colonialism was manifested then and how it's being transformed and still manifested today. And they experienced that from the perspective of migrants in Chicago. So to me, that's really important because it's part of the documentation of coloniality.
Yeah, and we're going to see that with the other two examples that we're presenting. Again, to make that point, it's not looking to the past in a nostalgic way. It's longing for the power to regain what was lost. It's a different thing. It's not, you know, it's again, it's projecting ways of living, right? And we're talking about a lot in these cases, a lot of people that are still part of the community of indigenous folks. So that line hasn't broken. It's not looking to some pre-Hispanic, it's looking to pre-Hispanic moments, but in a way that it's a through line. But go ahead.
Let me give you an example of not only looking back and looking to see how coloniality keeps on being manifested, but also transforming notions of coloniality, right? The idea of the local as docile, right? Yeah. This goes back into the second point that we want to make, the notion of transformation. And one example that plays this very nicely is Tendencia's song Al Machete. I'm not gonna have to show the whole thing. I just want to show you the very beginning. But these are examples of bands who are using cultural artifacts from their countries to challenge notions of the past. So this is Al Machete. You can look for the video later. I'll put it on the notes. But the Al Machete is a call to arms, and it's a call to arms for Cuban independence from Spanish colonialism. And it's not a coincidence that these bands shows it because they label themselves as mestizo metal. So what they're doing is they're bringing forth the idea of the importance of Black people, Black freed slaves in the formation of the nation, of anti-colonial resistance. What you're looking at in that initial part of the video is a documentary film called La Primera Carga al Machete, which is a historic documentary in Cuba that shows the Mambises, which are freed slaves, freedom fighters, which included freed slaves, using machetes against the colonial resistance. So notice how metal uses the image, particularly of the documentary film, in this case, a Cuban example, to transform notions of local people as docile, which is a key component of colonialism and a key component of coloniality. And bands like Tendencia are doing that in Cuba.
And there's a very important point in that also, in the sense that it reflects the way that basically whoever's in power uses the way that we project bodies or people. So there's a very disability studies component to the way that this is deployed, right? The notion of a docile body versus a lot of these bands in a very interesting way. I know it's a binary and it's not the ideal in terms of disability studies, but obviously when you are under colonialism still, you fight fire with fire, right? So to press upon Nelson's point, this notion of docility and showing bodies becomes important as a way to push back at the erasure of a lot of these communities and bodies that are still current, right? And that leads us to the example of Chasca. Chasca from Peru, they basically have made their music to reflect pre-Hispanic history. So they're basically doing, again, fighting fire with fire. They're erasing the history of colonialism and the moment that the Spaniards come by looking further back and writing songs specifically from a pre-Hispanic period. And so this album cover for Pururauca and the album itself, and a lot of the songs, and the final song, which is Pururauca itself, it's like a 14-minute epic, basically tells the story of a key battle during the beginnings of the Inca Empire, where the Incas were seemingly at the cusp of being erased. And it's very quickly, the image that you're seeing, you're gonna see human figures, but you're also gonna see some strange figures that are actually made of stone. So the battle that we're witnessing here is an Incan god basically they've clothed these rocks with warrior clothing, and the god basically, brings them to life and moves them forward so that they can help the Incas win the battle. But again, it's what we find interesting, right? Again, going back to the second point, transforms the visual dimensions of coloniality by subverting historically linked themes that continue to oppress communities, right? Indigenous docility, environmentalism, extractivism. So in the example of Tendencia, by going back to recovering and their Afro descent and celebrating that, and in the case of Chaska, with actually just fully removing any Hispanic, colonialism in their product, basically, are basically transforming that visual dimension in ways that we, have only seen pretty much in colonial contexts and in the global South. And then we can move to.
We want to give you one last example, and I know that we run out of time, so I'm going to use 1 more minute and cut into my question time, if that's okay, Charlotte and Amanda, because I think it's important to give a practical example of how decolonial metal actually plays out in the field beyond just listening to metal music and creating metal music. So part of what we're trying to do is understand that decolonial metal and this look to the past, this look to the pre-modern, this examination of the tensions between modernity and coloniality, the relation between those two. It's not only looking at the past in order to feel nostalgia or have certain feelings or experience the desire to go back for the sake of going back. It's the examination of the past to move forward. And this is very important. And we see this in bands, for example, in Ecuador. Bands who are explicitly decolonial, who actually look to the past to move forward to fight against extractivism. Of course, that's a key component of colonialism, 15th century colonialism and coloniality today. So this is a photo from some of the ethnographic work that we've done in Imbabura, in Ecuador. Ecuador is one of the most deforested countries in Latin America, and it's estimated that at least 15% of its territory is currently given through privatization to international and mining companies. So now just think about that, 15% of your country given to mining companies from abroad, right? And one of the things that we've done is follow bands like Curare. These are bands who are very much linked to indigenous communities in Ecuador and who are activists themselves, who work with activist communities to actually fight alongside communities on the ground against mining companies there. And one of the things that happens when you show up in a Curare concert is that the past is present.
Yeah.
So this is an example of a mosh pit, which the first time I've seen a mosh pit like this was doing work in Ecuador. Fans just show up with Ayauma masks, which are masks for, used by indigenous populations to worship Inca sun god to prepare for the harvest, right? And these masks were labeled as demonic by Spanish conquistadors, right? And fans just carry them around when they go to Curare concerts as part of the mosh pit, right? The band also incorporates in things of indigenous themes in the way they present themselves. For example, when they talk about mining and they talk about the importance of clean water, they invoke the indigenous names of the lakes around Imbabura as a strategy before starting the concert. This is something that we've shown in Act of Resistance in the documentary that you can find on YouTube. So these to us are examples of how the past is not brought up just to make itself different from other metal artists, just to make a dent in the metal market, just to make itself different from metal in the global north. It's brought back because it's a way to move forward, a way to understand the exploitation that these communities have gone through and the need to surpass that by looking at nature in this particular example in a non-extractivist, non-developmental way, right? So to us, it's a clear example of how decolonial metal uses the visual dimensions of decoloniality in a very practical manner to look at the past in a constructive way,
and
not
very
just
importantly,
such as nostalgia.
And very important, we need to make the point that in that mosh pit, the people that are dressed up like that, it's not cosplay, right? It's heritage. It's wearing what has been handed down to you by your own culture, by your own family and everything. So it's interesting for us to consider that in the sense of that extractivism, the dangers, and we've seen this, and we're not going to talk much because I know someone's going to present on Semicon, but a band like Semicon hitting the stage and, you know, projecting, I guess, that heritage, but then, you know, the dangers then of people looking at that, emulating it, and creating some sort of extractivism that can become a form of cosplay. So I think the anti-nostalgic mode falls in line with that as well, in the sense of the people that you're seeing in the mosh pit are not being nostalgic about it. They're just, again, living a through line of their culture.
I know that we've run out of time, so I think we should stop there, Daniel, and see if there are any questions, and then we can field it. I think we got about 5 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you both so much. And I want to apologize for not introducing you properly because I didn't have the web page up. When I say I look forward to everything that you guys publish, I'm not kidding. Like, I think your guys' work is so important. And I'm so honored to even just share this with you guys, because I read your work quite often and I cite you both as often as I can. So the first question for you guys, and my chat just got moved as the share screen got disappeared. So let me stall.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Now I just need to stall. So yes, here's the question from Aaron. Your dialogues feel so immediate and essential. So with that, how much threat is felt from government and other institutions by them and the communities they're working with? What strategies do they use to adapt to that element?
Did you say threats from the government?
Yeah, it says threat, yes.
Yeah, I mean, part of what we notice when we travel throughout Latin America is that in some places of the world, metal artists have this separation between being metal and being part of the community. So in many of these places where decolonial metal is actually taking place, the identity between being an activist and being a metalhead, it's diffused, right? So you don't know where one starts and the other begins. You don't know if you were a metal fan before you were an activist, or you were an activist before you were a metal fan. And that entails that some of these people are not just going to concerts to talk about what's happening in their communities. They are embedded in their communities. So when they go out to stop a bulldozer from entering your community, you're there. You might not be there to play your guitar, but you're there, and you're there as a metalhead. And that to me is a very, very important distinction, right? So there is persecution in some of these cases. Just think about, for example, when Paul Gilman, an outright leftist person in Venezuela, was very much pro government there, pro the Bolivarian revolution. He was censured when he was going to travel to Colombia a few years ago. So there is censorship because you engage in some of these political reflections, which you may not share, but censorship is still there anyway. So these are people that we've invited to write for us, write along with us, and talk with us, and write together in the Global South book that's going to be coming out next year, because we are including musicians as authors in part of these dialogues that are going to be published in the book.
Thank you. And there's one more question from the group. This is from Greg. If there's time, to what extent are these artists using English, Spanish, or indigenous languages? How are the tensions inherent in writing anti-colonial and a colonial language explored? Daniel mentioned fighting fire with fire. Is this a stance which is articulated by these bands? Yeah,
I think that, Daniel, do you mind if I take this question? I think this is a key component, because when we talk about decoloniality, we don't think of decoloniality as a delinking completely from colonial strategies. There's no way to step outside the Western project. There's no way to step outside coloniality. So a band in Latin America singing in English could be labeled as using colonial strategies, but in a globalized world, you use the tools that you have. And if the tools that you have are multilingual, that's the tool that you have. So it's really important to think about the considerations that philosophers like Enrique Dussel and thinkers like Ramon Grossfogel have spoken about decolonialism, saying it's not leaving modernity because it's impossible to leave it. It's understanding that the Western world and its worldview is just one more seat at the table, right? So these bands They sing in indigenous languages, they use indigenous instrumentation, but they're using electric guitars, and they're using, Western instrumentation, and they're using Western, musicality to actually provide a decolonial strategy in and of itself. So it's important that we don't ask purism out of people.
Yeah.
Because people are using the strategies that they're using, transforming them for their own merit and for their own purposes. And in this instance, even those bands in Latin America who actually sing in English are engaging in decolonial strategy. Think about the Armada. The Armada just released an album that Daniel showed, and you have songs in both Spanish and English, and songs that go from Spanish to English in the same song. Why do they do that? Because they are colonial migrants in Chicago. That's their everyday thing.
That's their context, and that's their community. And there's Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, all sorts of people in Chicago. So they're speaking to their people, but they're also speaking back at the empire from its own myths. And to go back to that point, it's also a notion of balance, right? And Nelson mentioned a few, but I'll also add, Mignolo, Walter Mignolo, and De la Cadena, Marisol de la Cadena, who speak about the plurals, right? The universe of plurality, a world of many worlds. And so it becomes a notion of balance, right? So you can critique colonialism, but you have to create some balance that you're not always citing, Foucault and the same people from the global north. You have to also bring in these voices from the global south and start citing them more often. So again, it's not to erase, Western thought or any of that. Is that we rely so much on it that a lot of the speaking back is, yeah, but what about Mignolo? What about De la Cadena? What about Dussel? What about Lugones, right? There's other thinkers that can help us navigate this, particularly in that context. So it's not an erasure, it's just a way of balancing out the voices that we constantly hear.
This ties into the final clarification question that I had from a non-native English speaker, just asking to clarify if the use of traditional masks and native toponyms in the scene is a way to erase the colonial era, as if it was not a part of local history. But based on what you just said, it seems like it's these bands saying, but look at this other history. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, there's no realistic way to erase that history. I mean, that history is within us. It's in our heads. It's in our bodies. It's in the land. It's everywhere. But it is a matter. It is a way of pushing back and saying, just like Mirzoeff is saying, just don't trust the police who are telling you to just go on. There's nothing to see here. There is actually something to see here, and what there is to see here is our history, right? Yeah. Our colonial history, which is tied to modernity, and therefore our examination of the pre-modern is a way of challenging coloniality. Right? And I think if that's a takeaway from what we're trying to do here today, and I know we've run out of time, that should be, I'm happy with that.
And we walk in it, right? It's not just a mass. We walk amongst like the remnants of colonialism, like the smokestacks of sugar plantations, or even just, plantation homes, or like it's there, right? So it's undeniable, the existence of it. It's just, using that spotlight to direct our vision elsewhere and think differently, think in a manner that we haven't thought before.
Thank you both so much for your work and your presentation. I think you both are so great.